Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Uh, Always great to be on one of these ABAC mastery courses. I don't know about you guys, but I look forward to each one of these sessions. Uh, it's always fun being able to co-present with a few colleagues, sometimes some external people. Uh, I'm happy this morning. I've got two colleagues joining me, Jamie Burns and David Morvan. Uh, and today we're gonna basically bring it all the way back. And if you go to the next slide, over the last over the last 8 sessions, we've done it all. We started with ABAC basics. Talking about how ABAC is written, how to conceptualize it, what does it actually mean, and then we've built on that. Going through how to use natural language to write policies, how different verticals like the finance industry, the manufacturing industry, the healthcare industries, how all of them leverage and need ABAC for their businesses. But today we're actually going to talk more generally, and what I wanted to do for our September session is focus on why is ABAC an absolute must for businesses and security. Why does the legacy approach that was created back in the 1980s, why is it no longer good enough? Because that's what a lot of people really kind of focus in on is, well, it's good enough. Unfortunately, the good enough isn't good enough anymore, and we need to start evolving how users access data. So, with that in mind, Jamie, why is ABAC a must? Let's go through it.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. So the reason why it's no longer good enough, and Matt sort of mentioned it, is that there has been a model or a standard that enterprises have been leveraging for a very long time. And every enterprise that we have conversations with, they're all experiencing the same challenge, which is everyone continues to build thousands of applications, and every application has its own complexity, and every application has its own set of permissions and entitlements. But again, this model, and we call it isolated authorization, it's no longer good enough from a security standpoint, right? It's everyone's projects are tied to zero trust. We all know the saying, never trust, always verify, right? We want to make sure that users are accessing the information that they're supposed to or they're entitled to. This model leads to non-compliant, right? Because everyone's sort of doing their own thing. They're all on their own island, right? Everyone's got their own set of policies. It's really hard to work with other business units. It's expensive because you got to continue to hire developers. And again, it's inefficient from a auditing standpoint, right? It's really hard for auditors to go into each individual application, look through code to ensure that the enterprise is being compliant to the regulations that they need to adhere to. And sort of continuing on that trend again, with the isolated authorization model, the traditional IAM solutions that have been around for a very long time, again, are no longer good enough, again, from a best practices security standpoint. Majority of enterprises today are still on the RBAC model. Again, just leveraging a user's role to ensure that they're accessing the right information in the right time, in the right context, again, is no longer good enough. You got to go beyond just who the user is and their role. We need to bring in a lot more information that we know about the user or the resource that they're trying to access to ensure, again, they're accessing the information that they're supposed to. A lot of times, with these traditional solutions, context is ignored. Again, we're just going off, who the user is, what their title is. We're not taking into consideration on, where they're located, the date and time of day, what are the resources that they're trying to access, should we leverage, the metadata to ensure, again, they're accessing, the right information. And then as well, risk is also not taken into effect. And there's sort of two use cases, that we're hearing from enterprises. You've got the internal use case where, let's say, Matt and I were working on a project together, and we've shared our login information because, maybe I went on vacation and we needed to finish the project. And let's say 6 months down the line, I leave the organization and Matt now knows my username and password, right? So when he logs in, yes, he's logged in as Jamie Burns, but he really isn't Jamie Burns, right? Because again, we're just basing it off, who he is and what his title is, right? We're not taking into consideration other factors of his location, his IP address. Let's pull in a risk score from someone like CrowdStrike or another tool that can provide us with a risk score. Because again, we want to make sure that, your users are accessing information they're supposed to. And of course, ensuring that you're complying, with your specific regulations. And then the other use case is the external use case, right? Unfortunately, there's not nice people out there, who are stealing people's identity. So again, we want to make sure that users are who they say they are, and of course, accessing the information that they're supposed to.
Yeah, maybe just on that, one of the points that you made that I really want to highlight quickly, Jamie.
Yes.
That legacy approach, it's basically what you were saying. It's a very much a binary approach to authorization, which means you have access, you don't have access. It's not taking into any of the other considerations like where you are, what you're doing at the time, what you've been doing over the course of the day. It's not looking at that dynamic risk associated with your behavior at this given moment in time. And that's really where ABAC starts to shine. It's not binary. It's not yes, no. It's yes, no, but also the advice and obligation. But it's also looking at this exact moment in time.
Correct. Yeah, well said, Matt. And that sort of ties into this really well. This is just, an example of unfortunate, data breach that happened to a financial institution last year. We hear about data breaches all the time, but this one definitely could have been avoidable, right? So again, there was an employee who was accessing, customer information that they were not entitled to, right? So again, this enterprise was probably on the traditional, IAM solutions, just, looking at the user's role, where if they were leveraging more of, a policy-based or attribute-based solution, whatever acronyms, we want to use today, right? They weren't taking into account that, maybe this user was, located in this specific region. So they should have only had access to his clients or her clients in specific region. He didn't take in time of, probably the records, so leveraging the metadata, what type of documents this person was accessing. So again, these accidental data breaches of accessing information that users aren't supposed to are very avoidable when, transitioning from that RBAC model to more of a PBAC or an ABAC approach.
Jamie, I'm going to put you on the spot, and I don't want to do the doom and gloom, scare tactic, right? But with this type of data breach, do you know what the cost associated with the data breach was?
I don't know an exact number, but I'm pretty sure it was in the millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Right, and that's a lot of money for something, again, that could have been very avoidable if, again, shifting from the traditional solutions that a lot of enterprises have in place today, because, again, context wasn't taken in place, who the user was, what kind of records they were trying to access, right? This data breach could have definitely been avoidable.
Yeah.
All right, which leads us into our model, and our model we call it orchestrated authorization. So what we're doing is we are centralizing the accountability while decentralizing the policy authoring. So what that means is we are pulling the authorization out of the applications. We're centralizing it in a single pane of glass. My next slide here, I'm going to highlight our different UIs when it comes to creating those policies. And then the key component that you've heard me say here in the last couple of minutes is reaching out, to your different data sources, pulling in different attributes about the user, about the environment that they're trying to access, to ensure that we go beyond, again, the traditional RBAC model, ensuring that this individual, this user, is accessing the information again in the right context. And then on the right-hand side, these are the key use cases that we hear all the time and where we're helping our customers. The first one I've been hearing a lot more with my customers, that you want a solution that's providing a frictionless user experience. We've all been there before where we've tried to access information and we've been denied and we don't know why we can't access that information. So we have to send a message off to our manager, and then that manager has got to send off, our request, maybe probably to the IT team. And sometimes it could be a day, it could be 2 days before that access is granted. And that's just, not efficient when it comes to ensuring that, users are conducting their business in the way they should be. And if I'm not allowed to access information, that takes away of me doing my job properly, right? So that's why more of a dynamic runtime authorization is important. And if I am denied access to the information, we can provide, an obligation or advice to the user explaining why they're denied so that they can take appropriate actions sort of moving forward. Zero trust. Zero trust is tied to pretty much every project, that we work on. Again, we want to make sure that, users are accessing information that they're supposed to, never trust, always verify. Every environment is different, right? So we want to make sure that our solution can scale to all of your different applications. If they're on premise, if they're in the cloud, if you're shifting towards more of a microservices mesh architecture. So again, we want to make sure our solution can scale to all of these different environments. And probably the most common is regulations, right? So we want to make sure that our solution is dynamic. Our solution is not tailored just for one vertical. So we want to make sure that no matter if, the enterprise is in healthcare, in the financial vertical, we want to make sure that our solution is, robust to ensure that we're meeting these complex use cases and adhering to these specific regulations. All right. And this is just a quick workflow architecture of runtime authorization. I don't know, maybe Dave, Matt, do we want to walk them through this quickly?
Yeah, I'll take this one. It's my time to shine, not Matt's. So it'd be my pleasure to walk through this one. So as Jamie said, this is a bit of an architectural workflow. It's not strictly an architecture, but it's the flow a user would typically go through in an externalized fashion for applications. Now, traditionally, as Jamie mentioned, applications would have accesses baked in, and every application would have its own. And of course, that's difficult to manage because it's every application on its own and not kind of combined into one general thought of accesses, which is what externalized authorization provides. So your typical workflow in a situation where you want to focus on your applications having no concept necessarily of authorizations baked in, but externalizing it and asking a question of, is this person supposed to see this stuff? This is what we're looking at. User's going to log into your application through APIs or microservice, whatever it is. The user is going to log in. The login method is going to follow the standard login process that you have within your organization. Your authentication is going to be the same. Of course, that part follows true. Once the user's in the application, now is when you get into, what am I going to present the user? What do I want their experience to be? Do I want to give them a custom landing page that allows them to see some of the things they're supposed to see? Do I want to give them a table that has information on it that they're supposed to see? Decisions need to be made at this point. The application, of course, knows that it needs to externalize those decisions. So it's going to work with what's called a policy enforcement point. That's going to be kind of a little wedge between the application and the Axiomatics REST API, which is where the decisions come from. The PEP is responsible for gathering information from the application, such as who is the user, are they trying to take a particular action, are we trying to present them a specific tile or widget or UI, are they trying to work with certain types of information. Anything that we can understand at that time, it's going to send to the Axiomatics decision service via a query. Now the query is going to come into the what we call Axiomatics decision service. That is ultimately a PDP, a policy decision point. That PDP has a set of policies and attribute connectors and all kinds of fun stuff in there to allow us to make decisions. Now we take that input from the policy enforcement point as a starting point to running policy. We go through the entire workflow of policy to determine, are we going to get a permit? Are we going to get a deny? Are we going to send advice or obligations, which is additional payload back to the policy enforcement point? When we start going through that policy, though, we're going to notice that we're missing information. And that's information that we typically will gather from an attribute connector connecting to an attribute source or an organization's source of truth. Right. So if I need more information about a user, maybe I'm going to reach out to Active Directory. Maybe I'm going to reach out to an IGA or something like that to gather more information about the user. Maybe I also need to gather more information about the resource they're trying to access. Maybe it's data in a database and I need to understand where that information resides. All of this is information that gets gathered during that decision-making process. Ultimately, at the end of this, a decision is made, whether it's a permit or deny, and with additional information in the forms of obligation or advice, which is a payload that'll give you information, maybe why someone was denied, or more information or context about someone being permitted, or an obligation, which is, yes, you're allowed to do this, but maybe I want to enforce step-up authentication, and the PEP should trigger MFA before the user gets access to a certain thing. All of these things get returned from our PDP, the Axiomatics decision service, back to the policy enforcement point. And the policy enforcement point, of course, works with the application to enforce the decision that was made. So I'll pause there, Jamie, but that's kind of the typical workflow that we would see. That's why I kind of said it's not strictly architectural. Architecture is obviously required in that, but that is the typical workflow that we would see for kind of a standard application that's following an externalized authorization model.
Perfect. Thanks, Dave. Appreciate you walking us through that. All right. So, we've been doing this for a very long time, and every project is different, but what sort of is the same is that there's a lot of different departments that need to be involved to ensure that the project is going to be successful. And as I mentioned, we want to make sure that whoever creating the policies, we want to make sure that they're comfortable with the UI. So we provide two different UIs when it comes to policy creation. So the first one on the left-hand side is our Axiomatics Services Manager. So this is more tailored for more the business, the IAM team. I believe Dave's going to be walking you guys through this in a couple of minutes. And then the one on the right-hand side is our policy as code, our own language called Alpha, and that stands for the abbreviated language for authorization. This is more tailored towards your developers or your architects. And if this is of interest, we're more than happy to schedule a call with you and walk through Alpha in a little bit more detail if that's of interest. And then we also provide a testing framework. So this allows you to build out your policies, test them, run them through your pipelines to ensure that they're correct before deploying them out to your applications. And again, this is something that we can dive deeper in if you're interested. All right. And this is a newer solution that we brought to market last year called Contextual Authorization Query. Dave, do you mind maybe taking a couple minutes and sort of highlighting the two use cases here?
Yeah, absolutely. So this service has been around for quite some time, actually. I think it's over a year now, Jamie. You're losing track of time, but
I
it's
know.
okay.
For a while.
Yeah, I know. So contextual authorization query allows us to take, and I like to kind of phrase it as it's a 180 on the PDP. It kind of takes the PDP, flips it upside down. So instead of saying permit or deny, we're going to say, how do I get a permit or deny? And there's two main scenarios there that we look at here, but there's more ways that our customers choose to use the tool, but this is a good way of kind of getting you into that mindset. The first way or first scenario or use case would be, let's say I want a generic answer to how can somebody read customer data. If I'm a business person in a specific organization within the organization, a specific business unit, and I say I've just joined, how do people get to see our customer data? Right? How do they see that? I'm not looking at one in particular person like Bob. I'm saying, hey, in general, what attributes does somebody have to have in order for them to see or read customer data? So this will tell you that. It will go through and give you all of the attributes that are required in order for someone to get a permit. And then you'll know when a PDP is actually running a decision, these are the types of contextual pieces about a user or resource that need to be met in order for a permit to happen. Now, on the other side of that is you want to get more specific and say, how can Bob read customer data? I want to actually understand Bob's situation, right? So it's all good for auditing, but I also want to confirm that, Bob's getting the right access at the right time to this. So I can query that same thing just for Bob, and it will tell me specific to Bob what context, metadata wise or location wise or whatever it is that individual needs to have in order for them to get access to the customer data. Now, this can be put into place for many reasons, for auditing purposes, general questions and queries, or even taken and used as a filter for APIs. So there's a lot of methods or ways in which you could use this, but it does provide a very good view into the PDP, but just look at it kind of as a PDP on its head.
Perfect. Thanks, Dave. Appreciate you walking through that. And again, if this tool is of interest, you want to learn more, please let us know. We're more than happy to schedule a session. All right. Now, we all know that reporting is a key component because, again, we want to make sure that, your policies are correct. How many, permits or errors or denies are we getting, on a weekly, daily basis. So we provide a high-level dashboard, with this information. But if you want to dive deeper, the logs are definitely accessible, and you can tie it into your SIM or BI tool of choice. All right. And then a key component for us is, we want to make sure that, we can work with your existing and future solutions. So we do have some strategic partnerships, that we work with on a daily basis. So the ones on the right-hand side here. So again, if you're interested in learning about, any potential integrations or partnerships with your existing or future tools that you're considering, again, please let us know. We're more than happy to have that conversation. All right. There's one partnership, I want to highlight because we're getting a lot of traction. So the partnership was with a company called eShare. And the key use case, that we're solving is with SharePoint Online. We all know that if folks on the call have used SharePoint Online, it can be sometimes difficult or challenging when it comes to external sharing. So this is where we have partnered, with eShare. So as a user is trying to share information externally, that information, goes through the eShare policy enforcement point. And similar to how Dave highlighted the workflow a couple of slides ago, they would send us that information that the user is trying to access. We would run it through policy, and we can also reach out to other data sources or data points to pull in more information about the user or the resource, and then run it through policy and then send it back to eShare to enforce. There's a lot of other components that eShare does around emails, and it's more the Office 365 suite. So again, if this is a challenge that your enterprise is having, again, we'd welcome the opportunity to schedule a call so that we can dive deeper into our integration partnership with eShare.
I'm just going to quickly jump in again. Actually,
of course.
So we, just as a quick little plug, we actually do have another webinar that we ran a couple months back on the eShare integration. This is definitely one of those ones that is everywhere. If you look at the percentage of customers and organizations that are running Microsoft SharePoint internally, it is a staggering number. I think it was upwards of about 80+%.
Yeah.
Which is incredible. I'm not going to give a plug to Microsoft on that one, but they have done a good job of selling their product. But while it's a great tool, it's not great for sharing information. It's not great for sharing, especially on the outside the business side of the world. Yep. This integration makes for sharing a far more secure method. It means that you've got the ability to share comfortably, share with the right person. You've got a controlled sharing method as well. So if you are enjoying this webinar and you want to learn more, I highly recommend going back and watching the eShare integration. It does a great job of going through some different scenarios.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Matt. All right, so to sort of finish off here, we're very fortunate enough to work with a lot of fantastic enterprises today. A lot of times we get asked if our solution is tailored to one vertical. The answer is no. That's why we've built an extremely robust tool to ensure that we can meet these complex use cases that enterprises are facing today. And then last but not least, before I hand it over to Dave, we all know that technology is great, but if you can't get it deployed, then your project is not going to be successful. As I mentioned, we've been doing this now for around 18 years. We've got a lot of experience. So again, we welcome the opportunity to schedule a session because a lot of times we get feedback on where do we start when it comes to an ABAC, PBAC solution. So again, this presentation is very resourceful. And again, we've been very successful with getting our solution deployed to very large enterprises and hundreds of applications. So again, we'd welcome the opportunity to walk you through this presentation. All right, so that's it on my end, Matt.
Beautiful. And well done, Jamie. It's always great watching you present.
Thanks, man.
On that note, we'll pivot from the theoretical slideware side of things and jump right into an actual presentation. And by presentation, I should say a live demo of the product.
Yeah, that's me right here. I'm sharing. I'm not staring aimlessly at a screen. There we go. I should be sharing. And yes, it'll be live demo. You don't want to see me doing slides.
You are now sharing. It looks good.
All right, cool. So what we and this is a kind of a typical demo that we'll do. We created this demo environment to kind of showcase the art of the possible. It's kind of it can seem true for most organizations. This is a purchase order system. Most companies have that, so it's kind of vertical agnostic, which is important because verticals matter, and we do well in financials and healthcare and all that kind of fun stuff. But verticals don't necessarily mean you have to comply to something specific to verticals. Every organization has a variety of things that they use, and there's a lot of ways in which you can leverage authorization in every environment. So we created this to show the art of the possible. Now, what we're looking at right here is not our software. If you ask for it, and if you ask Matt for it, he'd probably give it to you, but it's not what you're getting when you get Axiomatics. It's what's under the hood. So as I'm going through logging in and showing the experience and interacting with the application, I'll be calling out where the PDP is making decisions and how it's kind of helping that along. So that said, I'm going to go ahead and log in with my first user. I've got 3 users, all 3 different personas, meaning different sets of attributes that define who they are. Okay, first person I'm going to log in with, the name is probably going to be familiar. So this is a PO system for a paper company that is popular on the television. So Michael is our manager. He's in the US, okay, and he has some specific functions that happen in this application. So when he logs in, if I don't botch the login, good, we get a landing page. Now, first things first, this landing page, decisions had to be made in order for the landing page to be put together for this particular user. So when someone logs in, a decision does get made. We say, what do we want this user's experience to be? We have to find out who that user is, what are the attributes that define them, right? And then based on that, we'll present specific UI or help the application present specific UI. Now, what you'll notice different here, and I'm going to log into a couple people, but one of the individuals is not going to have this reporting feature because they're not a manager. Because Michael's a manager, he gets access to all the widgets and UIs and things on the screen. And in particular, because he's in the US, everything he does in here is going to be focused on the location he oversees, which is the United States. Okay, so that's the landing page we get. Now, if Michael goes and chooses to get into the purchase order system, he'll click on that tile, and now he gets exposure to all of the data behind the tile that he's allowed to see or supposed to see. What we'll see here is that every user that's in the United States that basically falls under his purview is going to be shown in this page, and it shows all of the purchase orders that they've put through. And Michael has a very specific function in here that's approving and or rejecting purchase orders, right? And that's his job function. So this list is whittled down based on a decision from Axiomatics again. What location is he in? It's the US, so we get all those purchase orders. Now, if he goes one step further into a purchase order, and we'll go into one for Jim here. Jim Halpert has put in a purchase order. The details aren't important. That's not what we're trying to show with this particular demo. But what's important is once Michael has reviewed the purchase order, we've got these buttons down here for approve and reject. Okay, now those are very obvious buttons. We know what they're going to do. If he approves, then obviously the purchase order is going to go through and all that. If he rejects, then maybe it's back to the drawing board for the purchase order person, and they've got to figure that out. The important part is these buttons are dynamic, and they're also triggered by Axiomatics, right? Based on a decision. Do we want to show the approve or reject buttons? Do we want to allow this manager to approve or reject? And you're going to see on the next person we log in with, this is all based off of the individual having taken specific trainings. Those trainings are logged in the database. That database is referenced when we go to expose the buttons. And if they have the right training taken and the certification done, they'll get these buttons. For now, we don't need to stress about that. Michael's good to go. He's been a manager for a very long time. He'll go ahead and approve this PO. It's approved. We can go back into the purchase order screen, and we'll see the next time kind of we get in there and it refreshes, we've got Jim's POs approved. Okay, so the whole experience is crafted. Obviously, the developer who put work into putting the page and making it efficient, that's all done, and that application just needs to take the inputs from the PDP on what it's supposed to show or not show. Okay, so now if I go back here, I'll go to the dashboard, kind of get back here, I'll log out, and we're going to go log in with our next user. Okay, this one will be Jim. And if I do the password right, we should get in. Good. Now, important note about Jim. Jim has just recently become a manager. Okay, so he was promoted to manager. You can see he's got this reporting button, so he can start doing the manager-y type things that you're supposed to do in applications. Okay, and that's great. So he gets very similar experience to Michael. He goes in to create purchase orders or approve purchase orders. He can do all those fun things. He can see everything that Michael saw because he's a manager. Okay, now I'm going to do one additional thing. I'm going to go into Dwight's purchase order. You're going to see he doesn't have the approve or reject button. Okay? And that's an important note because, as I said, it takes keys off of the attributes dynamically and says, well, if you've taken this training, great. If you haven't, then, well, no buttons for you. Now, the important part here is if I toggle over, and yes, I did toggle quickly to another browser, this is my source of truth in this environment. Okay, this is not what's going to be in your environment. Although, again, if you asked for it, Matt would probably give it to you. But for now, this is just for this environment. It's not part of our software. It is our source of truth. Consider it like an Active Directory or an IGA or a database with information about your users or resources. If I look at Michael, these are the attributes that he has. Very basic. Every organization has way more attributes about people than this, but demo environment. Okay. So we can see he's a manager. He's in the US. His industry is the office. That doesn't really come into play much. But this one right here called purchasing approvals is what exposed Michael to those buttons. Okay. Purchasing basics. That's great. Everybody's got that. Work safety. Sure. That's good. But this purchasing approvals is important. Now, if Jim were to finish his training, it took a while, but he finally gets there, and he goes and says, I got my certification. Someone goes through the process of adding the attribute to the database. I said, oh, he's now taken this training. He's certified in purchasing approvals. I'm going to go ahead and approve this for Jim. I'll save the change. It's now in our system. And if I toggle back to the UI where Jim's making his approve, reject decisions, or wants to be doing those, all I have to do is refresh the page. And now I'm going to get exposed to those buttons, because at runtime, we're going to go and check policy. Policy is going to say, oh, that training is valid now. We're going to let the application or the policy enforcement point know that, yes, we can expose these buttons. And now Jim can go and approve or reject POs. Okay. So you can kind of see how these attributes can be taken dynamically at runtime. They can be managed just like how organizations manage attributes today in existing systems, and they can come into effect in applications just like this. Now, I'll log out of here. I'm going to log in with one more person just to kind of show a different flavor, maybe somebody that's not in the management role. Okay, and I'll go with Pam. So Pam is your general day-to-day worker. Okay, she's going to be putting POs in the system just like everybody else. They got to get the job done. POs need to be put in. When she logs in, her experience is a little bit different, right? She's not a manager. If I toggle over to my source of truth we looked at before and I find Pam, she's an employee, not a manager. Yes, she's in the US, but she doesn't have purchasing approval. She doesn't have any of that stuff that tells, well, specifically would be manager that would have given her that reporting tile, but she doesn't have that, right? So all she can really do in here is check the suppliers, get some help, and of course, do the PO thing. Now, when she goes to interact with the purchase orders, you're going to notice, well, where's everybody else? Well, that's because she's not a manager, right? She doesn't see everybody in the US. She only sees her own purchase orders. That's the part of the job she needs to do. She doesn't need to worry about what other individuals are doing. So she can go in here, she can see her purchase orders, she can create new purchase orders. She can't approve purchase orders. That has to be a manager that's going to approve everybody else's POs. Now, one other thing we do show in here sometimes is just another effect that an attribute can have on what we're seeing here. This comes up from customers from time to time, and it surprises me sometimes that it does come up nowadays, but it's still a thing. When individuals are no longer employed with an organization, whether voluntarily or other, oftentimes it takes a while for those updates to happen in your IDP and your IGA and in the systems that have the information about people that you typically would terminate, so they don't have the ability to log into things. Sometimes those organizations still allow people to log in for a period of time. Now, if you own an application and say, well, I don't want that, and I know the individual is leaving or left, and it should be effective immediate. I don't want them to get in and see everything. Well, you can't stop them from getting in if you're just a general business unit person, because you don't have the ability to terminate, somebody's authentication. But you can, if you have access to the attributes, remove an attribute that would be important in the workflow. If I go in and remove the fact that she's an employee, if I spell that right, and I go and save it, great. Now I go back to my application. Sure, she can log in, but she can't see anything when she's in here, right? So I just run time right away, real time. I refresh the page. And even if you had a bad actor that wanted to go in and grab some information, if you remove some basic attributes that you're getting from a source of truth in your organization, it's going to dramatically change the way in which the application is presenting or not presenting information to the individual. So that may be an edge case for a lot of organizations, but you'd be surprised how many find themselves in a situation where people can log in for a period of time when they shouldn't.
Yeah, that's the for anybody watching, it's always fun to go back, try to log into some of the old systems of companies that you used to work for, and you might be shocked that you still have access. Dave, going back, so one of the things that I brought up at the start of this call is, why that old 1980s approach to security just doesn't simply work anymore. So we're looking at this from the lens of an ABAC model or an attribute-based model. If we were doing this with a role-based, what would that process look like? How long would that actually take? You know, walk us through that that legacy model.
Yeah, I mean, every environment's going to be different, of course, but in the more traditional RBAC model, what we hear and how it works, I mean, those could be two different things, but what we hear a lot is the role explosion thing, right? That's not foreign to us. We know a role gets spawned because of a specific need. Maybe you've got one or two individuals that are different than everybody else, and as a result, you have to create a new role, and that role has to get put in and then understood and described properly and documented with an SOP or whatever, and all of that has to exist, and then you end up with 10,000 roles that are needed just for a 500-person company, for example. That is very difficult to manage. Those roles, the way you look at them, are just a compilation of attributes, right? So that's why externalizing it, not the way we look at it, is, well, instead of building roles, you build policies around attributes. That way, no matter what happens in the organization, you don't need to create new roles. You may need to expand your policy base a little bit, but it's going to cover everybody, assuming you manage your attributes correctly. Now, if this application was managed with roles, that's fine, and their roles are still valid. We use roles in ABAC as a normal attribute, which is great, but the way I look at it is, this is one application. Okay, if you have a role change, or maybe not change, but spawn because of a specific need, you're not just putting that into one application. That spawns across many applications. There's a big downstream effect. Now you have to have somebody go into, let's say you've got 30 systems of record that people are going to log into on a daily basis or weekly basis, and you need to update the roles in each system according to changes that are being made based on the individual or a couple individuals. That's a lot to manage, and that's where we hear the challenge is that, yes, if it was one application, not such a big deal. If I'm talking about all my applications, the downstream effect on that is, it's quite cumbersome to manage. So instead of changing that role in each system, you're just changing an attribute in a policy and allowing every application that connects to the same policy set to leverage the same policies and the same attributes, and allow or deny based on that. So you're centralizing the whole thing instead of having to manage roles in every single application. It's much easier once you go down that path.
Yeah, I 100% agree. You know, as soon as we make that change in one application, it takes effect in, you know, the dozens of other applications that a user might have to work within. I think one of the other elements that I really like is it takes effect immediately, which means as soon as the user tries to interact with the application again, it takes effect. With a lot of applications, what we often see is that level of access that they have remains part of their initial login. So once you're authenticated, your level of access is governed by the time of your login. So if those changes are happening behind the scenes, you're not going to notice the change until you log out and log back in, which is obviously going against what Jamie was saying, the zero trust, never trust, always verify method.
I agree.
Excellent.
All right, let's get into this. How did we do all this, right? It's great. I show the demo and we get into the art of the possible, and we talk about this with a very basic application with a very basic set of use cases. Organizations can have more complex stuff than this, and you know, that's awesome. But hopefully this is helpful. Now, I do want to show a little bit of how the policy was made, lift the hood a little bit and see, you know, what does Axiomatics expect to have for a policy administrator to create. What we're looking at here is our tool. So I know I've said multiple times here, this is not our tool. Matt will give it to you, but it's not our tool. This is actually our tool. So if you purchase Axiomatics, you get access to the services manager. You also get access to policies code, which Jamie did mention in his presentation, where if you wanted to do this and kind of incorporate it directly into your CI/CD and allow policy creators to do it all locally and test it locally and do all the fun stuff, there's a very robust method for that. But some people want a UI. So great. We got a UI, we got you. So this is our UI for policy creation. First thing I do like to showcase, and mine's very boring because I've just got one project, but most organizations are going to have multiple projects. The project is kind of a workspace for specific either concepts or groups or projects or applications. You could bucket them for anything. We see organizations have different projects for pre-prod, for QA, for dev, for prod. We see some that'll break it up per business unit, some that'll have a group of applications in one project, or maybe just one application that is kind of siloed on its own and shouldn't be interacted with other applications. You can carve this up however you want, but it is a space that only individuals that have access to that project are going to be able to go in and either administer or view what's been built there. Okay, so it's a very important concept, especially in the UI world, because if you have access to multiple projects, you can toggle between them, work on them as a policy administrator, publish them out to domains and test them and do all that kind of fun stuff, but only for the projects you have access to. First thing I'd like to go through after we've gotten through understanding that a project is a workspace for you is to go into the dictionary. Now, the dictionary is, why do you need a dictionary? Well, you need placeholders for all the attributes that you're going to be working with, right? If I look at the use case, let's even go with the use case of the demo that we just looked at. My first use case would have been a manager in the US can approve purchase orders. And I could extend that even more, and I could say purchase orders that are in the US, right? I could bolt that on and say, because that's what the reality was, is the locations needed to match. The US is US, the US is not Europe, right? So if I look at that, manager, well, that's an attribute. US, well, that's an attribute. Approve, well, that's an attribute, that's an action, that's an attribute, it's important. And then we look at PO, well, that's a resource, right? So these are all elements that are part of building a policy. In order to build the policy, I have to make sure these attributes exist. So I'll go into my dictionary, I'll unpack what I just said, and I'll create attributes for every single element of my use cases that I know is going to require an attribute. What I just said also falls into one of four categories. So before you start building your attributes, you need to know what category they fall in. The first category here is access subject. Okay, that's the individual or system. Yes, you can do non-human identities too. It doesn't have to just be people. It could be systems. Access subject is very important. You're going to get context and detail about the individual or system that's trying to do something, right? So if I know everything about this, maybe if I even look at what we've done here, I've got a user region, user.region. That's my attribute. That's my placeholder. I'm eventually going to get a value that's going to tell me that user's region. But for now, I just need a placeholder. So I'll put that in. I'll build it. And you'll see when I go into the policy creation part that's going to show up as something that we can actually use. The role is important. Training was important for us. If I wanted to put certifications in, if I wanted to put citizenship, nationality, date of birth, boss's name, so on and so forth. These are all attributes that define the individual or system that we're trying to work with. Okay, so as much as we know about that, we'll build them in advance. If you don't build them in advance, it's okay. You can always go back and build them later. But as much as you know in advance, the better. Okay, that's the access subject. Now, action, that one's pretty straightforward. Your CRUD operations, create, read, update, delete, whatever it is you're trying to do in the application, you need to know, because you might have a totally different set of policies for one versus the other. Okay, so action is important. Environment, this is the most popular, I'll say, for this would be like a date and time variable. So if you're saying, I want my individuals to be able to do stuff Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 during their workday, and they can do whatever they want, but on weekends, I want to lock that down. I don't want anybody after hours or on weekends going in and manipulating anything. They can only do that during their work hours, right? You can have a totally different set of policies for that. And the last one is the resource. And this is where we look at, well, what am I trying to protect? I know my person or system that's trying to access. What are they trying to access? Is it data? Is it resources? Is it UI elements? Is it, whatever it might be? Well, I want to know more about that. Give me the context about it. So do I need to know information about the resources location, which is important? I think I have one for that as well. Resource, which one did I use? Resource.region, I think is the one we're using in this application. Anyways, doesn't really matter. We need to know information about that. Could be metadata. It could be if it's a document, it's in a draft or final state. Maybe it's owned by a specific person or specific team. Maybe it is classified with the classification tool as confidential or top secret, and that's relevant because a user that's going to access it needs to have that same clearance level or classification approvals. All of these is just context and metadata about the information so we can make an evaluation as to when the individual or system should be able to access it. Okay. That was a really lengthy way of talking about the dictionary, but it's super important before you go and do anything that you've taken care of this. You'll see that because if I go into the attribute connector section, which is where we actually say, I'm going to go get these values. I have no idea what David's trying to do. Who is David? I have no idea. I'm going to go into systems and find out who he is. Well, these are the attribute connectors that do that. We have out of the box connectors that follow standard connection mechanisms, JDBC connection, HTTP for your REST APIs and so on and so forth. You can do LDAP to get into your on-premise AD, and all the standard connections are out of the box. We also have parsers. Parsers are important. People don't think about parsing, but parsing is important. You're going to get a payload back from something like an HTTP source, and it's going to have a bunch of information. Well, I can't use a bunch of information as an attribute. I mean, I could, but I'm not going to. I want to whittle it down to the one piece of information. If I got a risk score from a system that said, I know all the users' risk scores and that's a moving target, well, I don't want to just get, the whole bag of information back from the API. I want to whittle it down and parse it using a JSON parser to get just the exact value. So when I go and put that in policy, I'm looking at a specific value. So I know if that number is, the user's number is above my threshold or not. Okay. So all to say, I won't go through all these connectors, but very important. These connect to your existing systems on premise, your databases, your Active Directories, your CrowdStrikes and SailPoints and all the fun stuff that you guys that everybody's invested in will go into those systems using standard connections that they already offer. We'll grab values as necessary when we run policy. Okay? And we help you build all these. And if you needed to create a custom attribute connector, we have guys for that. That's not uncommon. Some organizations have custom sources that don't follow your standard mechanisms, and we can help create that. We've got SDKs for that. The only other thing I'll call out here is the caching configuration. It's important to note that every attribute, all attributes are not equal. So every attribute can have its own caching, meaning you can have no cache, a short cache, a long cache, and every attribute can have its own setting. Picture date of birth versus a risk score. Date of birth probably doesn't change all that often unless for some reason when you were a kid a mistake was made and now you need to update that. Or if you compare that to a risk score, right? A risk score is a moving target. Date of birth, you could put a long cache timer on. Risk score, maybe low timer, like an hour. No timer, maybe if your risk score updates often, because you want to get the most real-time value for that. So every single attribute can get its own cache timer. Very important. All right, I'll jump into policy here, and we'll kind of go through this a little bit quickly, but you'll get the gist of it pretty quick when I go in. This is our visual workflow. Okay, as mentioned, there's policy as code, and you can go through that and build it all within code, but some people like to have the visuals behind it. It helps, especially in the early days of these projects. This is my main entry point. So when I go in here, and yes, I know I got real estate issues because I'm on a laptop. When I go in, this is my main entry point. I'm going to go in left to right and navigate top to bottom and go through everything as necessary based on the attributes I know from my policy enforcement point. Okay. Now, in my case, I'm going to be going through the main policy. I'm just going to jump right to purchase orders. Those are all references to one of those branches. But if I get into the purchase orders, which is where we actually were working, you'll see the PEP would have sent us information about us clicking on that purchase order button. So when I was in the application with Michael or Pam or Jim, I clicked on that button, that purchase order button. The PEP sent me this. It would say purchase order. So if I see resource.object type is purchase order in that query that came to the PDP, then I'm going to say, okay, well, this is the path I'm going down. I'm going down this path. Then I'm going to go to the top and start running through what's next. Action.identity, this would be the action. I talked about the CRUD operations. Well, read. All I did in that application was read. So this path is actually true. The PEP would tell me I'm trying to read something. Okay, in this case, what's first? I've got a couple different individuals that are going to be able to read POs, right? Your manager and your employee both can do that. They can read their own POs. That's exactly what this is for. If I go and pull the attribute for Michael or Pam or Jim, and I'm going to find out they were an employee or a manager, I'm going to say, well, if they are, then I carry on to the rule. Let's go take a look at the rule. The rule itself, just a simple toggle. It just says permit, right? In that case, great. We know they're permitted, but we've got that little caveat down here that you can't really see, but you can kind of see it's a condition. It says The order user ID needs to equal the identity of the, what this basically means, the identity of the individual. So the resource that they're trying to look at needs to equal the individual's resource. So Pam can only see Pam, Michael can only see Michael. I know that's not true. Michael can see more, but that's the next one. But individuals can only see their own POs out the gate, flat up. Okay. Now, if I go and look at more of the manager role, I'll say, well, the manager, he's got obviously the ability to go in and approve POs and see more things and do more things. So if they're a manager, they also will take a look at this path. They'll be permitted to see everything listed here. And that's going to be the resources are in the same region as the user. The user, Michael, is in the US. So he's going to see all of the resources in that region, meaning all of the POs that are generated from that region. And then the industry type, which we didn't really look at, but it was industry's office, which it's going to align. We didn't cover that in the demo, so I'll just kind of glaze over that a little bit. But as long as these are not as long as they're true, but these will be evaluated to put a condition onto it. And that kind of allows us to drive that. So the more you go through it, the more information you get, and you get these responses back to the policy enforcement point for enforcement in the application.
That was a lot to cover, Dave, in a very, very short period of time. I know we've only got 4 minutes left. We've had a whole series of different questions come up, actually. As far as, and maybe what we'll do is we'll actually go through these one by one. One question that came up, and Dave, you actually worked on this, so I'm going to pose it right to you. In our company, we're planning to do RAG within AI workflows. Since the sources used within RAG have different classification levels, we have to make sure that the current user is allowed to see the content of the single resources. So a manager may have a different result of the workflow than a normal employee. Do you have a solution for this type of challenge?
Yeah. Well, I'll say it's not only our solution. It's obviously a solution in conjunction with the AI product, but I did work on a really cool proof of concept with an AI company, and it works really well. So the main thing is, yes, your authorizations are going to be there. We need to understand context of the users and what types of guardrails you want to put on your resources. I'll use the word guardrails, and so it's totally doable. You're going to build policies in Axiomatics just how I discussed it here. The difference is when a user goes into the prompt, which is, all your AIs are going to be prompt generated, you're going to feed information into the AI system. It's going to be in a vector database. It's going to have all kinds of ones and zeros wrapped around it that I don't understand, and I'm not going to pretend to understand, but it's the brain, right? In order for that brain to go and give you information, it needs to have a query. Now, the person puts the prompt in, puts the query in. Before that query executes, the best way we found of doing it was to put the Axiomatics decision service in front of the vector database. So the query goes in, and then behind the scenes, we put, with a policy enforcement point in the AI workflow, we put a filter based off of the Axiomatics policy in front of it. So the query then gets a filter appended under the hood, which gets applied before it goes into the vector database to pull the information. And that we found mostly because, and I don't want to say the AI backend systems are not trusted, but they can't be trusted entirely, and you need to filter them ahead of time. And if you want to have additional security on it, you could also append a filter on after. So these would be, this would be not necessarily an output from a PDP as we kind of look at traditionally, but if you remember the contextual authorization query product that we talked about a little bit, that would be in that workflow, and that would give us filters. Just like on an API, you could apply filters. You can apply these filters to the query to give context to who the user is before the AI does its fun business on the back end. So we've done this in a proof of concept. It's a very cool way of doing it, and it does give you the results you're looking for and filters it so they only see what they're supposed to based on whatever information you fed into the LLM.
That's perfect. Great question. Another long answer, Dave. Thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that has taken us basically right to the top of the hour. I know there were other questions that had come in. We'll actually reach out to you guys specifically for more information. With regards to the question about RAG, if you are looking for more details, obviously feel free to reach out. My contact information is directly within the LinkedIn profile, so feel free to send me a note, and we can happily go through more information. With that in mind, again, thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time to sit with us today. I hope it's been a useful interaction, and if you do have more questions, as always, reach out, ask questions. Let's keep the conversation going. Thank you, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.